Good Tuesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for November the 14th. Today we are reading together in First Chronicles chapter 24. First Chronicles chapter 24 is going to tell us about the reign of King Joash. He was the boy king who was hidden away from the evil Athaliah so that the lineage of David would not be sniffed out, or snuffed out, I should say. Remember, she went about killing all of Ahaziah's descendants in order to take the throne for herself. The wife of Jehoiada ends up Jehosheba, is how she's called in Kings. I like that name a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to say, so I want to stick with that one. Jehosheba saves Joash, hides him in the temple, and then eventually Jehoiada and the people exalt him to power and put Athaliah and her followers to death. So that the kingdom can get back to the place that it should be, having a descendant of David on the throne. So let's read about then his reign in 2 Kings chapter 24. Really breaks down kind of nicely into two halves. Really the reign of Joash while Jehoiada is alive, and then the reign of Joash whenever Jehoiada has passed on. And let's just say they are quite different. Thanks so much for taking some time reading along with me today. Let's read here beginning in 1 Chronicles 24 and verse number 1. Second Chronicles 24, verse number 1. Joash was 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zabiah. She was from Beersheba. Throughout the time of the priest Jehoiada, Joash did what was right in Yahweh's sight. Jehoiada acquired 2 wives for him, and he was the father of sons and daughters. In verse number 4, afterward, Joash took it to heart to renovate Yahweh's temple. So he gathered the priests and Levites and said, "Go out to the cities of Judah and collect silver from all Israel to repair the temple of your God as needed year by year, and do it quickly." However, the Levites did not hurry. So the king called Jehoiada, the high priest, and said, "Why haven't you required the Levites to bring from Judah and Jerusalem the tax imposed by Yahweh's servant Moses and the assembly of Israel for the tent of the testimony?" For the sons of that wicked Athaliah broke into Yahweh's temple and even used the sacred things of Yahweh's temple for the Baals. At the king's command, a chest was made and placed outside the gate of Yahweh's temple. Then a proclamation was issued in Judah and Jerusalem that the tax of God's servant Moses imposed on Israel in the wilderness be brought to Yahweh. All the leaders and all the people rejoiced, brought the tax, and put it in the chest until it was full. Whenever the chest was brought by the Levites to the king's overseers, and when they saw that there was a large amount of silver, the king's secretary and the high priest's deputy came and emptied the chest, picked it up, and returned it to its place. They did this daily and gathered the silver in abundance. Then the king and Jehoiada gave it to those in charge of the labor on Yahweh's temple, who were hiring stonecutters and carpenters to renovate Yahweh's temple, also blacksmiths and coppersmiths to repair Yahweh's temple. The workmen did their work, and through them the repairs progressed. They restored God's temple to its specifications and reinforced it. When they finished, they presented the rest of the silver to the king and Jehoiada, who made articles for Yahweh's temple with it, articles for the ministry and for making burnt offerings, and ladles and articles of gold and silver. They regularly offered burnt offerings in Yahweh's temple throughout Jehoiada's life. And so that's the first half, really, of the reign of Joash. Then Jehoiada, in verse 15, died when he was old and full of days. He was 130 years old at his death. He was buried in the city of David with the kings, because he had done what was good in Israel with respect to God and his temple. However, after Jehoiada died, the rulers of Judah came and paid homage to the king. Then the king listened to them, and they abandoned the temple of Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, and served the Asherah poles and the idols. So there was wrath against Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt of theirs. Nevertheless, he sent them prophets to bring them back to Yahweh. They admonished them, but the people would not listen. The Spirit of God enveloped Zechariah, son of Jehoiada, the priest. He stood above the people and said to them, "This is what God says. Why are you transgressing Yahweh's commands so that you do not prosper? because you have abandoned Yahweh, he has abandoned you. But they conspired against him and stoned him at the king's command in the courtyard of Yahweh's temple. King Joash didn't remember the kindness that Zechariah's father Jehoiada had extended to him, but killed his son. While he was dying, Zechariah said, "May Yahweh see and demand an account." At the turn of the year, the Aramean army attacked Joash. They entered Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the leaders of the people among them, and all the plunder, and sent all the plunder to the king of Damascus. Although the Aramean army came with only a few men, Yahweh handed over a vast army to them because the people of Judah had abandoned Yahweh, the God of their ancestors. So they executed judgments, They executed judgments, I guess, and justice in some ways, on Joash. When the when the Arameans saw that Joash had many wounds, they left him. His servants conspired against him and killed him on his bed because he had shed the blood of the sons of the priest Jehoiada. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David. But they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. Those who conspired against him were Zabad, son of the Ammonite woman Shemayath, Jehozabad, son of the Moabite woman Shemerith, and Jehozabad, son of the Moabite woman Shemerith. The accounts concerning his sons, the many divine pronouncements against him, and the restoration of God's temple are recorded in the writing of the books of the king, or in the writing of the book of the kings. His son Amaziah became king in his place. And that is for 2 Chronicles chapter 24. 2 Chronicles chapter 24. All right, so again, Joash's reign really just does break down pretty nicely into two halves. Again, there's the half where Jehoiada is a great influence upon him, and Joash responds to him in a good way. But then there's a half where Jehoiada dies, and he no longer is able to serve really as that moral compass for Joash, it seems. So the beginning of this chapter talks about he was 7 years old, 7 years old whenever he became king. And he reigned for a long time, 40 years. Is quite a long reign, on the longer end of the spectrum for some of Judah's kings and Israel's as well. The chronicler acknowledges for us that it is throughout the time of the priest Jehoiada that Joash did what was right in Yahweh's sight. So we're given that little glimpse there that while Jehoiada is able to influence him, he's able to do, or he does do, what is right. So part of that is the whole renovation of the temple. We're told, and we made references yesterday, that it seems like the temple had been neglected during the reign of Athaliah, the 7 years in which she was reigning. And that's told to us explicitly in verse number 7, that the sons of the wicked Athaliah broke into the Yahweh's temple and even used the sacred things of Yahweh's temple for the Baals. So it had been completely neglected. So Joash has this within his heart to renovate it, to make things better. So he sends out the Levites and the priests to go and to collect the funds in order to do these renovations. And yet the Levites did not hurry. And this renovation project really didn't get off to a great start because people don't seem to be as motivated for it as they should be motivated. So Joash has to really get some people to understand these really the gravity of the situation and the seriousness of the situation, that, hey, we need to do this. This is God's house, and we need to make sure that it is well taken care of. And of course, it seems like Jehoiada was right there along with him in this process. So they end up sending this treasure chest of some sort, this chest in outside the gate of Yahweh's temple, and this tax that Moses had originally imposed on Israel in the wilderness, this was now brought to Yahweh. But notice that the people rejoiced, all the leaders and all the people rejoiced in this, because again, they saw this was a good thing. They saw this was a worthwhile cause, and this is something they were joyous in doing. I know for us and everything about paying our taxes, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't really rejoice in doing that. I just recognize it's something that we're supposed to do, to pay our taxes to the government. But they really rejoiced in that. They rejoiced in this tax because they knew it was actually going to good use. And maybe if we felt like our tax money was going to good use, we maybe would be a little bit joyous too. But that is certainly a different conversation for a different day. Nevertheless, they did their work. The money was given to them. The funds were given to those who were doing the work, the stone cutters, the carpenters, the blacksmiths, the coppersmiths. All these different individuals were doing their work, and they restored God's temple to the specifications, or to its specifications, and reinforced it. And when they finished, they presented the rest of the silver to the king and to Jehoiada, who made all these articles for Yahweh's temple. The articles for the ministry and the burnt offerings, the ladles, the articles of gold and silver, and they started to use the temple for what it's supposed to be used for, the regular offering of burnt offerings. And all this happened throughout Jehoiada's life. So this portion of Joash's reign was good. There was emphasis on the importance of the temple and making sure that it was restored to the proper condition so that it could be used for the purpose it was given, to be this place of connection between God and his people, this place where they would honor and revere God's name through worship and sacrifice. And yet, unfortunately, we see that Jehoiada dies, lived a long life, 130. Wow, really long life. And he was very much honored a great deal in his death, so much so that he was buried in the city of David with the kings. He was buried with the kings. He was just a priest, but he was buried with the kings because he had such great respect. He had done so many good things for Israel and had such great respect for God and for his temple. But unfortunately, once Jehoiada passed on, there were some rulers in Judah who took advantage of this and went to the king and began to really plant some seeds for some unfaithfulness. They abandoned the temple of Yahweh, and they ended up serving the Asherah poles and the idols. And because that God's wrath was against Judah and Jerusalem, God, though, is patient and loving and endures in his desire for his people to serve him. So he sent prophets to them time after time. They admonished the people, but the people would not listen. So then the Spirit of God, the text tells us, envelops Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, and he goes and he speaks to them. And he says, he speaks on behalf of God, says, why are you transgressing Yahweh's commands so that you don't prosper? Why have you abandoned Yahweh? No, because you've abandoned them, he has abandoned you. But they didn't like that message, did they? No. They wanted their ears tickled. They didn't want to be rebuked. They didn't want to be admonished. And so they conspired against him. They stoned him. And unfortunately, King Joash was also part of this as well. He forgot. He did not remember the kindness of Zechariah, the kindness of Zechariah's father, Jehoiada, the kindness that he had shown him, all the good that he had done for him. And so he allowed for all this to happen against Zechariah. And Zechariah, while he was dying, says, may Yahweh see and demand an account. He knows that God will be just in what he does. This is a major transgression, major sin on the part of Joash, not respecting the son of Jehoiada, especially considering that he was bringing the right message. He was bringing a message of blessing. And we're going to say, well, who would ever enjoy being rebuked? Who would ever enjoy being admonished? We have to remember that you would hope often messages of admonishments and rebuke, they're given out of love. And really, that's the way we should act toward one another. If we're willing to rebuke one another or to admonish one another, it has to be because there's a love there for our brother or our sister, and we just want them to be everything that God wants them to be, and to be a people of faith, and to show that faith in the way that they act and what they say and what they do and how they think and everything about who they are. We should not rebuke and admonish one another to get one up on them or to try to embarrass them or try to shame them. No, we need to show them love and compassion. That should be the way we should approach anytime there is a rebuke or an admonishment. That's hard to do sometimes, especially maybe if we've been offended. We might want to rebuke and admonish out of anger, but that can't be the case, friends. We cannot do that. I don't believe that's what Zechariah was doing. Zechariah was admonishing and rebuking the people on behalf of God to try to save them. But they unfortunately would not listen. And that's true for Joash as well. So God sends the Aramean army to come and to punish them, to bring judgment upon them. And he does a reversal from what he often did with Israel. Often Israel was the smaller army, able to defeat the larger army by the power of God. But here it is the smaller army of the Arameans who come against the larger army of Judah, and they defeat them. Why? Because they had God on their side. So whether you're the big army, whether you're the small army, if God is on your side, you will have the victory. And God was not on Israel's side, or excuse me, was not on Judah's side because of their unfaithfulness. And during this battle, Joash was injured greatly, and his servants conspire against him, which as I read this, I don't think this was their right. They were not the one that was supposed to kill God's king, but they did. And whenever he was buried, whenever Joash was buried, he was not buried with the kings. So Jehoiada shows himself to be greater by his behavior, by his faithfulness, than Joash. And the people recognized that, I believe. The people recognized how much better Jehoiada was than Joash in his faithfulness to God, and they wanted to honor him. They wanted to honor Jehoiada, whereas they did not honor Joash in this way. So unfortunately, as we think about this reign of Joash, it really just shows us the importance of who we surround ourselves with. If we have people surrounding us who are good influences upon us, then we have a great chance of maintaining a high standard of faithfulness. But let's be real honest. If we surround ourselves with people who don't have the same standard of morality we have, who don't have the same hopeful aspirations that we have of glorifying God, then we shouldn't be surprised if whenever their influences causes us to be much more like them than we cause them to be like us, especially if that's not something we really make a concerted effort to do. We have to be very, very wary of that, very wary of the influence of others around us. Joash was very blessed to have a Jehoiada in his life, and we should be looking for those as well. We should be looking for those who can serve as Jehoiadas in our lives and allow them to be a blessing to us from God. But if we don't have that, we need to be very careful about who we do surround ourselves with, who we allow to influence us. Because if not, there could be absolutely disastrous consequences. And we see that, unfortunately, here in the life of Joash. Tomorrow, we're going to get into chapter 25, which is going to tell us about King Amaziah and some wars that he was involved in. If you have any questions or comments about this text here in 2 Chronicles 24, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I do hope that you have a great rest of your Tuesday. May God bless you in all that you do. And hope you'll tune in tomorrow as we read together in 2 Chronicles 25. Take care and God bless.